I get quite obsessed about things, and I never realised that. A good friend of mine said to me, you know, your wife says you get obsessed about things, and I agree. And I was incredulous. I couldn't believe it. Obsessed? I don't get obsessed. And as the years have gone by, I realised I get incredibly obsessed. I get obsessed with things, and I can't leave it alone. And I go to bed at night thinking about it. And you know, bikes and hand-built bikes, and it's the same with that car. You know, that car was 7-8 years in the making, and it's still not finished. I've kind of made an agreement with myself to leave it for a while, and I'll come back to some other things I still want to do to it, but I just get obsessed about it, and it's a journey, and you can't stop. You literally go to sleep at night thinking about how you're going to solve a problem, or what you're going to do next, or what you're going to, and it's amazing. I really loved cars from the time I was about 8, and my parents owned a magazine store, so I'd wander in there and spend hours looking at all the magazines. And the two things I really got into was BMX and hot rods. And I'd sit there and draw these hot rods for hours and hours and hours. I knew how to draw a supercharger before I ever knew what a blower was. I didn't have a clue what it did, but I knew where all the bolts went. It's one of those burning desires through my life. Some things you gravitate towards and really love, and cars is one of them. Well, I started off like most people, I guess, and with the Holdens and Falcons and the sort of stuff you could get your hands on when I was 17 years old and 18 years old. When I got back into cars, I really wanted a project, and I didn't want a practical vehicle. I didn't want something that was about transport. I wanted to do something that I could make my own, and you know, I could only afford to buy something that was a project at that point. So that's where I started. You do have to kind of quantify it when you say you drive a T-bucket, because there's a big range of T-buckets, Model T Roadsters, but it's a late 50s style Model T Roadster. You know, that's what it is really, and it's in the vein of Norm Grabowski or Tommy Ivo's cars. It's not super raked. You know, it's a little bit more refined, I guess, in some ways. It's got a metal flake paint job, and it's got pretty wild exhausts, and yes, it is mechanically injected, but you know, it's a pretty simple car, really. It's powered by a 289 Ford, which originally had a 297 set up on it. And then I went to the States and managed to find a Hillborn fuel injection manifold for it, which was really difficult to find actually, for small block Ford. That goes into a C4 trans and into a 56 custom line diff. The front end is mainly 40 Ford, so the brakes are all, again, it's all pretty simple kind of traditional hot rod stuff. You know, one of the key things was to get it is channeled down over the frame, was to be sitting in the car and not sitting up, you know, like you're riding a pony or something. So that was a big part of it. The laid-back windscreen was something I thought about a lot, and ended up going with that quite angled look, which I wasn't sure about to start with, and then I went back the other way. But that's where I've ended up, and that's the personality of the car now. They are very simple, and I think a lot of people provide practical answers to problems which they have when they're building a T-bucket, and that will work, and yes, you can put that in there, but aesthetically and as far as what looks right and wrong, I think it's really easy to get off course, and just because something works practically doesn't mean that it's right. You can put your car in an L300 van chassis if you want to, or whatever. You can do that, but if you care, that's not the right way to do it. You know, there's a way of doing things. If you actually care about what came before you, if you care about, you know, it sounds arrogant, but what's cool, you know, it's not cool for no reason. It's cool because it's right and it works. My good friend John Pavlovich and Chris Piaggi built, you know, probably one of the most beautiful Model T Roadsters ever, certainly in New Zealand. And that was a huge influence as well, you know, because they built that at a time when people just weren't into traditional hot rodding at all. That word didn't exist when they built it. They understood exactly what they were building, and they wanted to build a car that wasn't a high-dollar street rod, because at that time in the 80s, that's what people were doing. A lot of people were spending a lot of money on street rods. People didn't believe that you could build a really cool show-winning car and do it cheaply. I knew John well and John Pavlovich well, and I told him I wanted to get a new project, and he said, "Oh, I think I know where there might be one." So we went over to Chris Piaggi's, and that's how I met Chris. And sure enough, in the corner of Chris's, there's a lot of stuff in Chris's workshop at any time. And, and the stuff in that workshop, I've been going there for years and years and years. I don't even know what's in there. I don't think he knows what's in there. I don't think anyone knows what's hidden under blankets and under the 4 layers of this and that in that place. It's a treasure trove. But in the back, right in the corner, was this basically pile of parts Chris had started assembling. The minute I saw that car, because he had the body sitting on the chassis, and the way it sat was perfect then. It looked perfect at that point, and it was, most people would have walked in and sort of not even noticed the pile of parts in the corner, but it screamed out to me, I loved it. So, and it's funny when you think back about times like that. I guess it's like the mother of a really ugly baby, because I really loved it then. I look back at it now, I thought, what a piece of shit, when I look back and think and look at pictures of it. But every time I come out to the garage and just sit here and look at it and think about, well, okay, I need to do that and everything. But I really loved it from day one. It was to me it was perfect. I took Keith Wiesner, who's a member of the Burbank Choppers and obviously a great hot rod artist, for a drive in the car. And for him to say there's probably, you could count on one hand the number of Model T Roadsters which are done right, and this is definitely one of them, was his comment. That was cool. You don't do it for those reasons, but for someone who understands it completely, to say that was very cool. Because I get obsessed with it, I'll be doing some job and sometimes I'll just throw a sheet over it and leave it and walk away from it. And I come back and I pull it off and I go, yeah, that's right. I do dig that. That's rad, So it's great. Now, it's easy to say that when it's not in millions of pieces all over the garage like it has been. The nature of that car was, it wasn't legal. There were so many big jobs. I call them the big jobs that's got to come off the road for months. Just because of life and funds and things like that, and figuring out how to do it, and then gets put all back together. There were a lot of those big jobs where it was in parts just constantly. So now most of the big jobs are done. To be able to just get in it and drive it is awesome. And someone said something great to me once, the difference between having a hot rod and not having a hot rod is hard work. You have to stick at it, and you have to put time into it. And that's resonated with me ever since I heard that. It's true, Either you've got enough money to buy what you want and throw money at things, or it's hard work.